In the Darkness I See by Anon Y. Chapter 4 Meditations on Art Part 1. Many months droned on with an interestingly unpredictable steadiness as Tommy and I became rather familiar with one another. As time fluttered by, our mutual respect blossomed. For Tommy, the relationship had clearly moved from a cautious repeat inquisition into a routine-laden kinship. His intellect was finally being allowed to flower, and we knew it. He was infatuated by the satiation of his pleasurable ponderances, and I was enamored with the consistent challenge. Each session seemed to stand in juxtaposition to his scrambled, transient adolescence. During each of the iteration pieces of our perennial pattern puzzle, I peered upon the young man pleasantly as he reflected my own troubled youth. Through aiding in his trauma, I was reminded of my own darkness. I made sure never to initiate the bulk conversations with him, reinforcing his knowing of my voluntary role as no more than a listener and guide through his own solution-making process. The silence aided in my mindful musing and monitoring, Tommy often choosing to mourn for many minutes the noisiness of human expectancy. I scrupulously observed him, and soon noticed that, in every single session, he followed the same sequence of unprovoked actions. To start, after settling into each meeting, he would affix his gaze on my radiant window, staring into the fixture as if to transport his consciousness through the now makeshift portal. Once entranced within his tunneled vision, he would proceed to pick at his right thumb skin, which had been scrubbed almost completely clean of its unique patterning. After his untrainable Pavlovian sequence had been completed, he would follow by asking me a multitude of unanswerable questions and delving into a slew of unproductive fixations. Those tangential discourses became as commonplace as the beams of light piercing through his peering portal. The queries, bothersome and uncalculated, signified that my paternal scent had effectively wafted over his unconscious mind. I could tell that the relationship with the young man was entering the gray area where stern professionalism and tender compassion duelled. Upon each session's closing, just below his face, one clear and clumsy meta-question arose from the hole in his unwhole heart. "Why bother with all this?" I could read it asking. "Still so much is a heart stained with such inescapable grief and longing, and yet there is something to it. Yes, tomorrow?" Though incapable of asking directly, that was the question to which his traumatized soul couldn't seem to find the answer, even with all his pragmatic brilliance. I sensed that he understood that the therapy, as manipulated by him, was never truly going to rectify the problems, but rather heal the surface of his bloated psyche corpse. In his mind, he was not worthy of saving from his torment. After all, Tommy had said it best. "Intellectualism," whispered the boy after 1 or 2 minutes past time on the stranger day it was, "is the most direct denotation of sadness. The bright brain, when thinking too hard about one's self, is the beginning of the end." What he didn't realize was that I was frustrated for him. He was dueling with depression. But what he consistently chose to communicate to me, outside of disguised as invulnerable riddles, was his mega cluster of thoughts and generalizations about people and hierarchies. Though superbly apt, his unerring intellect acted as a buffer to protect the frayed fibers of his mortal soul from heavenly peace and stability. Most of his remarks were synonymous with professional consensus, but he couldn't remove himself from the derisive data. My poor boy was in true pain. I caught a glimpse of true happiness exuberantly leaping from Tommy's face on only one occasion. Tommy would often bring his cello to the meetings, but never had played it before I asked. He never told me why he brought that thing at all. After many catechizing probes, he finally agreed to play his wonderful instrument, to me. It was a cold and glib afternoon, but warm and comfortable within my chambers, and so I knew that he couldn't resist the abstraction into cinematic creativity that was to be him warm masterfully playing his hum loveliness meltbox from within the withinness of the fireplace-like office of ours. After some additional coaxing contra his post-agreement reverse ambulation, he unpacked the behemoth, his sedulous demeanor growing as he rosined his bow. As if knowing precisely what the room needed, and without hesitation from him nor ingratiation from me, Tommy began to play the prelude to Bach's full cello suite No. 1. With each stroke, he pried life from the lumber. Tommy was the master of that moment, a gallant knight blazing his path on his marvelous timber steed. Each run of the bow gifted breath to the hollowed vessel, overwhelming vibrancy coursing through its powerful chest. The scene fell upon me with meteoric magnitude. The phenomenality of that dulcet tonality, crafted oh so tenderly by his crystalline virtuosity, engulfed me. Surrounded, with my senses overwhelmed, a steady stream of tears poured from my eyes, the vibration carrying through me as if I was some cellular matrix within a centrifuge, along for the ride, submerged in the glory of such a lovely moment. My heart was quickly filled with beauty and awe. Though my reaction was visceral, Tommy remained painstakingly entranced with his task, noticing me not. I was grateful for the more than accidental privacy, allowing me the freedom to be virtually, completely, persona-droppingly vulnerable. I suddenly found myself in 3 places at once. I was there in that room, enraptured by the music. I was in my past, reminiscing on my sorrows, and I was in Tommy's mind, aching for the dissolution of his torment. Not a microsecond was spared to relieve his pained tendons, arched back, or sweated brow. He had transcended humanity. His face was that of pure and tranquil focus. Each position on the fingerboard was held with intensity and accuracy. Each stroke of the bow was righteous and thorough. The dynamic dynamism of his chosen tempo, oh, that existentia pul tempo, how indescribably great it was. The young man possessed the room. As the last note rang off, his whole body dropped down slightly, and his musculature relaxed. Melting away his grievous veneer, a joyous expression filled his face. The performance itself was not the cause of his facial restructuring, though. With great assiduity, in the silent piece, the posthumous placidness only offerable by a masterpiece played equi-masterfully, I viewed the fleeting seconds of that young man's most entirety. In his trance-fueled moment, he escaped it all for a blip of a blip. He held it, his end and truth totality's beginning. As he looked up from nowhere acknowledged, he registered my dampened face. He suddenly morphed his look of numb superbness into a smile that dragged him all the way back to earth. The change from clearly grand to covert glum plus some, like death's friend. It was as if a mustang had been released from its corral and allowed to bound through a meadow for a moment of prosperous glory, only to find the edge of its freedom. Its life of remaining reinstantiated as ceremoniously as always. With its terminal trail blazed once again, and finding itself hopeless and trapped once more, the broken bronco returned to redefine further its somber demeanor. With the duration and schedule of his emotional expressions much troubling me, it was instantly clear what his art form meant to him. After we had both thought of ourselves, wondered about one another, and collected our emotions in a girthy internal aside, I asked for his definition of art. With little overt thoughtfulness, whilst returning his cello to its plastic concealment, Tommy quick-wittedly responded. "True art," he said, "is a slice of the moreness to being, acting as an eternal reminder of transcendent beauty and purity. Of course, this reminiscence is necessitated by the artist's sadness, anxiety, anger, and fear, oh awesome fear of life real. Hell, maybe even joy or aesthetic appreciation leaks into true art. However, something tells me that Satie wasn't feeling joyful satisfaction when composing Gymnopédie No. 1, and I doubt auspicious love filled Hopper as he painted Nighthawks. I suppose it's the cursed gift of the artist's journey. The achievement and recognition of the art is an additional benefit for the true artist, not his main directive. And every man finds perhaps true virtue in accomplishments. An artist, on the other hand, finds revelation in expression. With that anti-rosy and clear truth stated, and its meaning finishing having its way with me, Tommy instantly corrected my confusion as to the timing and level of glee brought about by his cello playing. He hadn't played the piece to escape into some realm of paradise, like many artists do. Rather, he had created a ceremony, performing his own personal and rejoiceful remembrance. His work had become a part of history. That human mark, irrevocably read, struck into the earth, searing into the universal abyss, some powerful storm raging into the unknown darkness. Though he understood the importance of purposeful directionality and focused endeavoring, it troubled me that one of the only parts of his life that gave him enjoyment was impregnated with deeply negative ideations. Though the thoughts that he had composed were troubling, they reflected the reasoning of one of my father's loathed philosophers. Like Nietzsche, Tommy seemingly understood the visions of the two prototypical men, antithetical but equally forceful. After his cello performance, it became clear who he was. I elaborated on the theory that he had proposed, but took a more neutral stance on art. I added Tommy's own proclaimed nuance to Nietzsche's dichotomous men formulation and proposed the amalgamated form to him. I wished to understand if his derived notion of an artist was semi-stolen universal or accidentally concurrent with consensus individualized. There are two main avenues, I urgently sang out, for men to fruit their flowering power. Each man will unknowingly but vehemently choose a path. The first man, a grand and unartistic achiever, not endeavoring in the fortuitous flows of artistic formulations, will choose to allocate time only to the uncircuitous path of reality. The second man, the ambivalent artist, is shallow in the experiential expanse of his external life, but is well nourished in all the ontological and epistemological truths and estimations of the world, symbolized as they may be for said artist. A tangled and tattered natal nest is thus woven into the finest of fabrics. Both men fulfill their will to power. The first, in daily routine, finds his own micro-expressionism to be the simple engorging of his will. Abundant in clarity and unrepudiated in truth, the first man's life itself frets not with unknowns. The artist, with his excellence exiled to thoughtful loneliness like some prohibited paramour, with all his troubling qualms, devours the night, quiet contemplation compounding within him. He births the most frabjous fabrications of art that the world comes to know. Thus the second man's will-to-power process is effectuated. The second man's world is art. As I spoke my accidental recapitulation of his idea into being, I realized the similarity in our claims, and my amazement instantly grew. His conception was arguably more accurate than mine. After all, many of the post-religious artworks, with doctrinal propriety named piety liquefying, freedom more on the loose, and the West's phantasmic father unrealer by the daughter-driven day, echoing non-existence, had in fact been the result of strong and deep negative emotions and events. Those being manifestations of suffering remaining, but metaphysical solutions missing by way of proportionally post-arrogant church revolting. As I began to agree with greater deference, Tommy added, Perhaps it's the struggle of the artist to integrate the shadow self due to his overactive imagination, the impossibility of coexistence with his darkness, knowing the girth of evil lying beneath, and having imaginative depictions of his capacities drives the artist to create. Or go insane. I quickly agreed with his assertion in the shallow manner my haste allowed. Within the silent moment that followed, I indulged in his theorem and found no solidarity with a counterclaim. I then gave up my search and thanked God for my earlier complex vapid claims concurrence. His perspectives scrambling of my mind soon morphed into a stimulation of memory. I remembered my late grandmother. She had written for a painter's publication, interviewing all types of artists along the way. Though the tumultuous tapestry lives of her artists were bestowed upon them through different means, each artist pranced ponderously down each's promenade with a disorderly and entropic urgency. The role of the artist, as she saw it, was to reorder the chaos they had cultivated. She believed that each artist was gifted more than many with the unrelenting energy of the universe, unrefined and brimful, and made sense of the pandemonium through artistic expression. I shared her memory with Tommy, and he mournfully stared at me. I asked what was wrong. In his eyes, desperation lurked. The end of his musical performance had seemed to be an end of his joy. Similarly, my point lineage's pronouncement with specificity little seemed to make clear the unspecial nature of Tommy's suffering, making it all less worth it for him to endure the thing called Tommy. His stark difference and thought superiority, those lost frontiers, melting. I watched as the need between him and what should have been an existential knowing blossomed, and I instantly understood that we had reached our art talk's therapeutic limit. He needed more than depth arisen from self's suffocating on satisfaction express. All that potent grief was held within his low look. "The transience of joy befalls me again," screamed his face. Tommy's ungrateful, desired over-nexus between happiness and value immediately irritated me. I had already explained countless times before that he was fighting against himself. To reinstate my simple point, I took a moment to find a note I had written to an old client. He had also been an artist. His name was Donald Ruckus, and he had chased his impulses through every hedonic high and low imaginable. Eventually, he found his solace in a simple, sober life, accepting realities outside of his desires. The note, for Donald, became a symbol of life outside of himself. I hoped that Tommy would find the same security within it. I showed the note to Tommy. It read as follows. "The worth in life falls between moments of happiness. The structure one can create for themselves is the dopaminergic key to reverent fulfillment. Only goal-oriented paths are rich with fortune. Thus, one must systematically shape their lives in a fashion that allows for the continual creating, striving, and accomplishing of one's goals. Once this basic organization has taken place, a person may expunge their emptiness. Of course, moored to this rigid constitution are the moments of fleeting joy that are designated by the cyclicality of life. This is the best solution to life's stubbornly linear and frustratingly long reality, right? If one's biology only reacted in moments of impossible to be more than seconds at a time, momentary pure happiness or satisfaction, then most of life would be void of physical emotion. The whilst goal-achieving endocrinological stimulation system allows for each moment, if reaching into the unknown for something worthwhile, for something greater than one's current self, to be filled with purpose and fulfillment. What a gift, right? All there is to do to activate this satiation system, with one's purpose scalar to their level of consciousness, is to accept that it's not about you, and that life is work. Oh, but that pride, though. What to do about that pride? I smiled prematurely. This has been Chapter 4, Part 1 of In the Darkness I See by Anon Y.